Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another installment of the Jawbreaker MMA podcast associated with the Sports Mark Analyst. My name is Adam. That guy's Roman. And we are here to round out our MMA Madness bracket, which we initially planned on doing last week, but we initially thought we were going to have an event to talk about last week, too. So, a little delayed, but we're going to finally get it done. So let's get right into it. Our last quadrant of the bracket. We're going to start off with Shogun against Henderson 1 and Tony Ferguson against Lando Venata.
Okay. So Shogun Hua, Dan Henderson, UFC 139, November 19th, 2011, main event, non-title fight. Shogun was coming off of a win over Forrest Griffin after he lost this title to John Jones. And then this was Dan Henderson's third stint in the UFC. He was on a 3-fight win streak. He won the Strikeforce light heavyweight title, defeating Feijao by TKO, and also defeated Fedor by TKO and found his way back into the UFC. This fight started out with Henderson going at it to Shogun. He hit him with a nice punch that backed up Shogun to the fence, and he just from there I took control from rounds 1 to 3, just total dominance. In round 4, that's where Shogun hurt Henderson. He was able to take him down and just ground and pound him. And throughout round 5 too, you could have made a 10-8 round for Shogun on that, on the 5th round. And also for Henderson, there could have been a 10-8 round in the early part of the fight. It was a war, bloody war. Winner was supposed to get a title shot against John Jones potentially. After rewatching the fight, you could give it to Henderson, but I wouldn't have been surprised or upset if it was going to be a draw in this fight. Tony Ferguson against Lando Venata, UFC Fight Night 91. It was the co-main event, July 13th, 2016. So he was originally Tony Ferguson was originally supposed to fight Michael Chiesa on that card, but Lando took the fight on 2 weeks' notice. Ferguson was on a 7-fight win streak, and Lando came in at 8-0 in the UFC. So in the first round, that's where Lando hit Tony Ferguson with that leg kick. He rocked him, and then he was throwing a few back fists that got Tony Ferguson. At one point of the fight, Ferguson was in trouble, but he always has that I don't know, it's that second win. He's able to come back, and then in the second round, you could tell Lando was tired. Ferguson was able to take him down and land that arm triangle on him and submit him. So between these two fights, I went with Shogun and Henderson for the next round.
Yeah, I agree. Shogun Henderson, again, like I've said a few times during these brackets, I put it up there as one of those all-out wars that you like to see as a good, entertaining MMA fight where two guys or girls are giving it their all. It's right up there with like a Griffin Bonner, Joanna, and Zhang Wei Li. Those guys, they were by the end of the fight, they were both exhausted, bloody, total war, exciting as hell. I think, like you said, I agree. I think it should have been a draw. After watching it again, I think it would have made most sense, like you said, because of a couple 10-8 rounds probably by both. That a draw would have made a lot of sense. Venata and Ferguson, yeah, it was pretty cool to see just because Venata was short notice, and I don't think a lot of people expected that to happen. Ferguson was seen as a superior guy, and when he caught Ferguson with a kick and then was hurting him with the back fist and a little bit more. It almost looked like, oh man, he might actually finish him. But Ferguson, he stays cool. He rolls out of there. And like you said, Venata, by the second round, he was just he was gassed. He was done. And then Ferguson locked in the submission. So yeah, but I think overall fight, yeah, I agree. I'll go with Shogun Henderson won as well. All right. Next up, we've got Vanderlei Silva against Brian Stan, going up against DC Daniel Cormier and Alexander Gustafsson.
All right. So Vanderlei Silva and Brian Stan, UFC Field TV 8, March 3rd, 2013. I was in Japan, actually. This fight took place. Right. Vanderlei Silva was coming off of a loss to Rich Franklin, and Brian Stan was coming off of a loss to Michael Bisping. So perfect fight to make, fan-friendly fight for the Japanese fans. This fight started off, of course, Brian Stan went at it at Vanderlei Silva, and both of them just swinging for the fences. Bloody brawl. At one point, he had Vanderlei hurt, then Brian Stan was hurt, and then I think in the second round, I mean, there was no game plan in this fight. I think it was just whoever was going to get knocked out. And Vanderlei actually, he was able to catch Brian Stan towards the end of the round, get him with a knockout. Surprisingly, that was Vanderlei's last win in his career, actually. And then you have Daniel Cormier against Alexander Gustafsson, UFC 192, October 3rd, 2015. Cormier was coming off of a submission win over Anthony Johnson to win the vacant title, light heavyweight title. He was making his first defense. And Alexander Gustafsson was coming off a TKO loss to Anthony Johnson. At that time, they just needed a contender. And I guess Gustafsson was the only one that was around and more credible. And this fight was really good. Another great fight that Gustafsson brought. It was a tough outing against DC. Same way how he brought the fight to John Jones. First round, you saw Cormier take Gustafsson down at will, just picked him up and just flipped him right over. And then in round two, that's where Gustafsson was giving Cormier a little bit of problems, but I think Cormier was able to land more efficient strikes. Round three, Gustafsson landed a nice knee. Cormier, at one point, I thought Cormier was, from what I remember when the first time watching, I thought he was out and Gustafsson was going to win the belt right there. But it was split decision. You can make an argument where there was one round where you could have gave it to Gustafsson where he could have won the belt. I think it was round two, the decisive that in between round. Round five, that's where Cormier had to secure the fight in order to win because he lost round three and round four. So round five was the round for him to win. Between those two fights, I did go with Cormier and Gustafsson to advance.
All right. Yeah, this was actually really tough for me to pick between these two. Cormier and Gustafsson. Great fight, great title fight. Especially one without John Jones being around. This is what the light heavyweight championship needed. It needed a fight like this. I think it really helped people. Not even think about Jones so much because he had these guys going on all in. You had Gustafsson doing what he does, bringing the fight, but DC was pretty smart at doing what he needed to do, which was close the distance, make sure Gustafsson doesn't use his range, hit him with some shots. Very close fight, but I actually chose Stan and Silva. It was I think just because it had a nostalgic thing to it because it was in Japan, the old Pride place. You had Vanderlei Silva, these guys just going at it back and forth. It had like an old school Pride feel to it. You would if you put those guys in you change the octagon to a ring, to a Pride ring, and you make everything look like Pride. I mean, you would think you're watching an old Pride fight. Um, so I give a very slight edge, probably mostly because of the nostalgia and the overall excitement. Even if it wasn't as long of a time, I actually went with Vanderlei and Brian Stan. All right. Up next, we have Eddie Alvarez against Justin Gaethje, going up head to head to Yancy Medeiros and Oliveira.
All right. So Eddie Alvarez and against Justin Gaethje, UFC 218, December 2nd, 2017 is the second fight on the pay-per-view. They both coached the Ultimate Fighter season 26. Eddie Alvarez was coming off of a no contest against Dustin Poirier, and prior he lost the belt to Conor. And Justin Gaethje was coming off of a TKO win over Michael Johnson in his UFC debut fight. He was coming into this fight 18-0. This fight was basically to determine who's the baddest man or the most dangerous man in that division.
Yeah.
So yeah,
didn't they tout it as like the
Backyard King?
Yeah, Underground King, wasn't that?
Underground King.
Wasn't
Yeah,
this for
yeah,
the under? Yeah, because he had the two
yeah.
guys from the two who ruled the two organizations they were a part of
Right.
and came in the
Right.
UFC.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the first round, it was basically the game plan was for Justin Gage. As I noticed, he was going to try to weaken up Eddie Alvarez's legs. He was doing lots of leg kicks. Eddie Alvarez was just landing the nice jabs. Was able to slow down Gagey. The third round, that's where it really got interesting. I thought Gagey was picking up the momentum. He had to go for the finish, so he was landing more leg kicks in that round. And at one point, I thought Eddie Alvarez was going to be hurt and he wasn't going to be able to get up, and Gagey was going to pound him out. But Alvarez landed. Did he land like an uppercut? If I'm recalling, like he landed a nice punch that put Gagey down. It was towards the end of the round to get that TKO win. And so yeah, and then the next fight, Yancy Medeiros versus Alexander Oliveira, was UFC 218, December 2nd, 2017. Third fight on the Fox prelims fight card. Yancy Medeiros was on a 2-fight win streak. Both fights were finishes. And then Oliveira was on a 4-fight win streak. So a perfect matchup to see which fighter is going to move up in this division. The first round was a war back and forth. Medeiros had Oliveira hurt, and then Oliveira was able to control most of the round actually. And hurt Medeiros actually, and then towards the end, Medeiros was able to withhold Oliveira, and then in the second round, that's when he was able to take control over Oliveira. Oliveira was gassed out, and Yancy was able to take him down and go for that submission on him. Between those two fights, I went with Eddie Alvarez, and Justin Gaethje.
All right. Yeah, Medeiros and Oliveira, it was a fun fight. There was good energy going into that fight. A couple guys who really like to go at it. Overall, just a nice, fun fight, I guess is the perfect way to put it. But Gaethje Alvarez, I just feel like there was so much coming into that. Because it was like an underground king, fight. These guys were fighting for something that was, maybe some people had talked about before when these guys were not in the UFC, that these guys were like ruling their weight class in a way in their other organizations. And yeah, two guys who were just, who really came to fight, two tough guys who just, didn't back down from a fight. They brought the fight. Um, yeah, mostly because of the hype behind it, and I would say because it did live up to the hype. I also went with Alvarez Gaethje to go on the next.
Okay.
All right. Up next, we have Benson Henderson against Anthony Pettis 1, going up against Carlos Condit and Rory McDonald.
All right. So Benson Henderson and Anthony Pettis, WEC 53, December 16, 2010, for the lightweight title. It was WEC's last show before merging with the UFC. And the winner from this fight would unify the title with whoever the UFC champion would be. It was between Frankie Edgar and Gray Maynard. They were gonna fight and I guess the winner would have fought them. So Benson Henderson was on a 10-fight win streak. It was 5-0 in the WEC, looking to defend his title for the second time. And Pettis was on a 3-fight win streak, 4-1 overall in WEC, and all those wins were by finish. The first round, the first round, it was pretty much all Benson Henderson. It was more of a technical fight. Well, overall, it was a technical fight. Benson Henderson was able to take control in the first round. But it was a little bit hard to score some rounds because the fight was a little bit slow, and just it was basically who was able to have better strategy in each round. There was one point where Pettis had Henderson's back for the whole full round. And going into the fifth round, that's where it was the decisive factor. And then like almost towards the end of the fight, when there was like a minute left, Pettis landed that kick off the fence, known as the Showtime kick now, or kick around the world, that made it famous. I thought Henderson was knocked out when he landed it. Somehow he just went back up. And I think that basically sealed the fight for Pettis right there. He went on to win the title. And then you have Carlos Condit against Rory McDonald, UFC 115, June 12th, 2010. It was the first fight on the pay-per-view. Carlos Condit was coming off a split decision win over Jake Ellenberger. It was his third fight in the UFC at that time. And Rory McDonald was coming in 10-0 in his second UFC fight. He's 20 years old, young prospect. He was like one of the highly rated prospects. I
didn't realize he was that young, that fight. They were both pretty young. Now that I remember, they look pretty young.
And Rory McDonald just took it to Condit the first 2 rounds, just dominated him, just outpunched him, outgrappled him. And then in the third round, right before the third round, I remember Craig Jackson gave that motivating speech to Carlos Condit to just go out there and attack him, just go for the finish, go for broke. And you could tell McDonald was pretty tired in that round, and Condit was able to land a lot of strikes on him, finally took him down, and just able to go for that final pound down. And it was like 20 seconds left, and Condit was able to win by TKO in that fight. As far as who I picked to win, to move on, I went with Henderson and Pettis in this one.
Yeah, that Condit McDonald fight, it really showed a lot. Yeah, 2 guys which I guess at the time weren't really as known as they ended up being later on. I know Condit was like, he had his he was doing his thing in WEC for a bit. But he still wasn't, like, I remember not knowing much about him at the time, other than that he was in WEC before. And McDonald was he was like a baby pretty much. So, but when you think about it now, you think about those 2 guys and the fights they've been, it was set up to be a good close fight. And McDonald really he brought the fight, probably did too much too soon considering how it went. But overall, just a really good matchup, especially for 2 young guys. But Henderson Pettis, it's just for a few reasons. One, that being the last WEC event, and of course that Showtime kick I mean, that kick alone, that just that made that fight. I mean, it's one of the most insane things ever. It's something you can't imagine it at this point. You can't imagine it happening again. I mean, sure, I guess it can, but like, you don't see a lot of guys with the balls to try to do
Right.
stuff like that. There's not too many. I mean, he can be very unorthodox with his stuff, and you can still see even now he tries some cartwheel kicks or some kind of tumbling kick that don't necessarily work as well. Um, but that, yeah, when that happened in that fight, as close as it was and as technical as it was, it's true, it was very technical. When that happened, yeah, I mean, immediately, I mean, I think you were almost hoping that that was the end of the fight because it would have been even more amazing if that would have just knocked out Henderson and that would have been it. That would have been like, oh wow. But nonetheless, it was still huge, and honestly, I can make the case for that alone. I have that winning going on to the next round, that fight. All right. Next up, we have Clay Guida versus Diego Sanchez going up against Johnny Hendricks and Carlos Condit.
All right. So Clay Guida against Diego Sanchez, UFC Ultimate Fighter 9 finale on June 20th, 2009. Clay Guida was on a 3-fight win streak, and Diego Sanchez was also on the 3-fight win streak. Diego Sanchez went down to lightweight in his prior fight and defeated Joe Stevenson. So basically, with this fight, if the winner would pretty much be guaranteed for a title shot for the lightweight title shot against BJ Penn. In the first round, Sanchez landed a nice head kick on Diego that you thought on Guida that you thought, wow, you thought he was knocked out and was just down and out, and he just bounced back. First round, it was all Sanchez, and then going into the second round, Guida was able to take control of Diego Sanchez, and then third round, it was I think Diego was able to steal it from there. But actually, in the first round, let me go back to it. It was just punches exchanged one to the other. It was just a brawl for a good amount of time. And those two fighters, you put them in, you definitely know there's going to be a war between them two. And I do agree with the decision with Diego winning. I think it was the right call. Going on to the next fight, Johnny Hendricks and Carlos Condit, UFC 158, March 16, 2013. I believe that was the co-main event. Johnny Hendricks was on a 5-fight win streak, and Condit was coming off of a loss to GSP for the welterweight title. So pretty much, if for Hendricks at least, win over Condit would have gave him a title shot against GSP. The first two rounds. The first round at least, it was all Hendricks with a takedown. Second round, too. Carlos Condit did land some nice landed a nice knee onto Hendricks that did rock him, but overall, like Hendricks wrestling basically won him that fight and got him that title shot against George St. Pierre. As far as advancement goes, I picked Guida and Sanchez to move on.
All right. Yeah, Hendricks took down Condit a lot in that fight. I mean, it was crazy part. I mean, Condit, he wasn't staying down for the most part for long. That's why Hendricks just kept going for it. He was able to take him down, but he wasn't necessarily able to keep him there all the time. Obviously a huge fight for them. But yeah, I agree. I had Guida Sanchez going on too. Two guys, you hear Diego Sanchez and Clay Guida, you have two guys who come to fight and have a war, and you hear Clay Guida especially, there's going to be some blood. So, and there was definitely blood. He got, hit a few times between the shin, between Diego Sanchez's shin and the elbows. um, he received too. He was he was cut open a couple times. So um, and yeah, it was just a matter of Guida. He was trying to use his wrestling to bail him out of getting hurt by Sanchez striking. Um, Overall, just I think it had a little more going, a little more entertainment, more of a scrap. So yeah, I agree. I'd Guida Sanchez moving on to the next two. All right, next up, we got Justin Gaethje going up against Michael Johnson uh, versus Czech Congo against Pat Barry.
So Justin Gaethje against Michael Johnson, UFC Ultimate Fighter 25 finale, July 7th, 2017. So in this fight, Justin Gaethje was coming in 17-0 to make his UFC debut. He was the lightweight champion at World Series of Fighting at that time with 5 title defenses, with all by TKO stoppages. Michael Johnson was coming off of a submission loss to Khabib in his prior fight, and in his prior fight, he KO'd Dustin Poirier in the first round. So I think this was a good test for Gaethje to see what he was made of, to see if the hype was real. And it was the first round was pretty entertaining, going back and forth. Michael Johnson was able to land some nice punches, and thinking pretty much towards the end of the first round, Gaethje was just all wobbly. I think Johnson hit him with a nice punch that almost put him out. And going into the second round, they just continued to go at it again, and then Gaethje was able to land a nice uppercut onto Michael Johnson and just pretty much put him away from there. And then you have Czech Congo against Pat Barry of UFC versus 4, June 26, 2011. Czech Congo would have been on a 2-fight win streak, but in one of his fights, he had a draw against Travis Brown due to a point reduction. And then Pat Barry was coming off of a win in his prior fight. Yeah, this fight, I think, is one of the underrated fights that no one really talks about. But
yeah, I almost forgot about it until I saw this again.
Yeah, Pat Barry just landed a nice punch right on Congo, and
yeah, he was dead.
He was rocked
for a second,
and then he landed another punch that knocked down Congo, and I don't know how Congo got up. I don't even know how the ref was able to let
the fight could have easily been stopped. I don't know how the ref didn't just go in and stop.
So Congo did the smart thing. He went back towards the fence to retrieve, and Pat Barry followed him, and just wildly they exchanged, and Czech Congo just landed a nice punch right onto Barry's jaw and just slept him, and it was just basically a zombie laying there. Like it was the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Eyes open, just glazed over.
So that being said, I did go with Congo and Barry to advance in this one. Probably one of the best fight sequences you will ever see that leads up to a knockout.
Yeah, I agree. I went with the same, which was, it was pretty tough, but how can you not choose that? That was just amazing. One of the craziest things in just such a short period of time too. But it seemed like it was going forever just because, one guy was out and then he came back to life, and it was one of the most insane things ever. Now, Gaethje and Johnson, it was, in a lot of other matchups, maybe I'd pick them to go on. It was a really good fight, and what Gaethje was able to do, especially in his debut, it was just really impressive. It was awesome for him, showing that he some hype behind him was living up to it. That was a great fight on its own, but you just can't go against that sequence. That was insane. One of the craziest things in all the combat sports, to be honest. I had them going on as well to the next round. All right. Next up, we have Leonard Garcia going up against Korean Zombie, won. And we have Tony Ferguson against Edson Barboza.
All right, so Leonard Garcia against Korean Zombie, WEC 48, April 24th, 2010. It was the headline of the prelim card, and it was WEC's first pay-per-view event, too.
Yeah, that's right.
So originally, Korean Zombie was originally supposed to fight Cub Swanson. He got injured. So Leonard Garcia was coming off of a decision loss, and prior fight was a draw. Korean Zombie was making his WEC debut with a 10-1 record with a 1-fight win streak. And yeah, these guys just went at it right at the very beginning, like towards in the first round, and just swung for the fences. There was no strategy in this fight. It was basically who could outland the other, and it was pretty much hard to score. I mean, it was a split decision, but it could have went both ways. Both of these guys basically proved, that they definitely they belong to go on to the UFC after this. Yeah, and then Tony Ferguson against Edson Barboza, UFC Ultimate Fighter Finale 22, December 11th, 2014 was the fourth fight on the main card. So in this one, Ferguson was supposed to fight Habib. Habib did get injured, and Tony Ferguson was coming in on a 6-fight win streak. Barboza was coming off of a decision win over Paul Felder, and this was a technical match. You know how Barboza is with those leg kicks, these combinations. He was able to cut Tony Ferguson, but I feel like that Ferguson had the better cardio, had better game plan, was able to take Barboza down eventually, and just get him in a submission and tap him out. I did go the fight I did go with was Garcia and Korean Zombie to advance.
All right. Was that the first time that Tony and Khabib were supposed to fight?
No, I believe this was no, I think it was the second time possibly. Jeez. Because I know
that's crazy.
Because the first time it was supposed to be the main event in Florida, and then Rashad Evans and Grover Teixeira main event in that. I think it was supposed to be in the summer, the main event, and then.
Yeah, so just to think.
Wrong. Yeah. Well, who knows? Whatever.
Still, so it seems like so long ago. It's amazing that they haven't.
They're gonna reschedule for the 6th time now, so what does it matter?
Yeah. We'll see. Yeah, Korean Zombie and Garcia. Yeah, it was awesome. They, like you said, they just went at it. It was, fan friendly, brawl friendly fight. That going up against, they're just the fun in that going up against Ferguson, Barboza. Like you said, Barboza was doing really well, but then he just got tired and got caught in a darce. Overall, just my opinion as a better fight, an evenly matched fight. I agree. I went with Garcia and Korean Zombie to move on to the next. One of the better fights that you don't hear too much about either, because it's probably because it's also a WEC fight. But all right, and then so last matchup here we have Anderson Silva, Chael Sonnen 1 going against George St. Pierre and Johnny Hendricks.
All right. So Anderson Silva against Chael Sonnen, UFC 117, August 7, 2010. So Anderson was on a 12-fight win streak and had 6 title defenses at that time. And Chael Sonnen was coming into the fight with a 3-fight win streak, defeated Nate Marquardt in his prior fight to be the number 1 contender. And leading into this fight, this was probably the biggest fight to see at that time because of Chael Sonnen just hyping it up. And
yeah, the trash talk was crazy.
Yeah, the trash talk was amazing. And
never saw anything like that, except at least nothing
before
that
Connor,
good.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like for it to be that the smart kind of trash talk, not like Tito
Right.
Ortiz or it's not this.
uh, yeah, and Sonnen all along was saying, "I'm gonna take Anderson down. I'm just gonna beat him up till it goes 5 rounds or until he gives up." And sure enough, rounds 1 through 4, even round 5, that's what Chael Sonnen did. He was able to take Anderson down and just hold him down pretty much. Even tagged Anderson in the first round. I mean, yeah, Anderson had some nice elbows from the bottom in each of the round, but Chael Sonnen was basically like dominant. And then in the 5th round, like a minute left into the fight, Chael made one little mistake. He just went low in Anderson's guard, and Anderson was able to wrap up the triangle and armbar pretty much, and was able to submit Chael Sonnen.
Was it
This
armbar or
this was
triangle?
it was both. The way it looked like he had his arm out and he was locked into the
And he had him.
triangle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so Anderson went on to win, but this fight to this day is probably one of the best middleweight fights I could think about, besides Adesanya and Gastelum. This is one of the craziest comebacks you would ever see. I know, unfortunately, there were controversies with this fight, with Chael Sonnen being on high levels of TRT. Like that was announced afterwards, but
Mm-hmm.
this fight was really good. And George St. Pierre against Johnny Hendricks, UFC 167. November 16th, 2013 was the UFC's 20th anniversary. GSP was on a 11-fight win streak and 8 title defenses. Johnny Hendricks was on a 6-fight win streak. Going into this fight, everyone was talking about this is GSP's toughest test. You have Johnny Hendricks, who has great knockout power. Kind of reminded me of Dan Henderson in a way. Great wrestler, just a nice knockout. The first round. The first round it was even. It was close. Both fighters had their moments. But the second round, that's where Johnny Hendricks was able to rock GSP, and GSP was all wobbly. You thought Johnny Hendricks was going to be able to put him away. In that fight, I think Hendricks was able to get GSP down 4 times, I believe. He was able to get down 4 times. And even after the fight, if you look at the faces, it's like Hendricks was not even in the fight. And then you look at GSP, he was like all battered up. I still, going back to this fight, I mean, I gave the second round to Hendricks. I gave the, I believe it was, I want to say was it the third or the fourth was, I think the 4th round was Hendricks. The 5th was GSP.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, the third, I thought Johnny Hendricks won that fight. But it just depends on how you score the first round. And with this, I advanced Silva and Sonnen in my bracket.
Yeah, Hendricks GSP. It was very close. I still actually give a slight edge to Hendricks. I'm pretty sure I remember watching the fight. Pretty sure I was rooting for GSP, but I had a feeling that Hendricks was going to come away with it. It just looked that way. I guess overall he was, he was doing with wrestling and beating up, beating up GSP. I mean, like you said, the look on his face, it was, wasn't it after that when GSP retired, right? Or
he did go away for
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that alone just kind of gave GSP like, all right, that was too close. I'm gonna chill out now for a bit. Great fight. And then Silva Sonnen, yeah, I mean, I'll never forget that. I was definitely rooting hard for Chael. It was just so fun to get behind because of his talking. I definitely didn't think it was going to go down like that, though. I don't think anybody thought it.
I thought it would be like a fast and done first or second round.
Yeah, I thought Yeah, I thought Anderson would, as much as I wanted Chael to win, I thought Anderson would have a fairly easy time. So the fact that Chael was able to
He
control
did
him,
say he did say he came into the fight with broken ribs, like,
yeah, he
but
was hurt. But
I don't know how.
but before knowing that, it's just you're watching and
Yeah,
you're thinking, oh man, this guy, like, he's gonna win. He's gonna be champion. Like, he's completely dominating him.
right.
Then yeah, you just don't expect that. Whatever, the triangle, the armbar, from Anderson to come at the end. It was it was insane. Just the biggest comeback. I was pretty disappointed. I remember at the time, but it was also, it's pretty impressive. It was just an amazing comeback to see. So I actually went the same. I chose Silva and Sonnen, one to go on to the next round. All right, so that's it for that level on that quad. So now we're gonna run down the next round of this one. So, all right, who you got? You're
All right.
next.
So between Shogun and Henderson and Cormier and Gustafson, I went with Shogun and Henderson. Eddie Alvarez, Justin Gagey with Benson Henderson and Pettis. I went with Benson Henderson and Pettis. Guida and Sanchez and Chuck Congo and Pat Barry. I went with Clay Guida and Diego Sanchez. I went with Garcia and Korean Zombie and Anderson Silva and Sonnen. I went with Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen.
Okay. So for me, between Shogun Henderson and Silva Stan, I went with Shogun Henderson. Shogun and Henderson. Between Alvarez Gaethje and Henderson Pettis, I went with Alvarez Gaethje. Between Guida Sanchez and Congo Berry, I went Congo Berry. And between Garcia, Korean Zombie, and Silva Sonnen, I went with Garcia and Korean Zombie.
Okay. So after that, with Shogun and Henderson and Pettis, I went with Shogun and Henderson, and then Diego Sanchez, Clay Guida, and Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen. I went with Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen.
All right. And I went with Shogun Henderson over Alvarez Gaethje. I went Garcia, Korean Zombie over Congo Berry.
And then from those two, I went with Shogun and Dan Henderson in my final four bracket.
Yep, I did the same. Shogun Henderson over Garcia, Korean Zombie going the final four. All right, so that's it. So now we have our final four.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, let's do this. So, all right, who do you have winning on the left side? First?
So between the two finalists I had was Dominic Cruz and TJ Dillashaw against John Jones and Alexander Gustafsson. I went with Dominic Cruz and TJ Dillashaw to go to the final.
All right. I had Lawler McDonald going up against Jones and Gustafsson. And I'm actually making my prediction right now as I'm thinking about it. I had Lawler McDonald.
Okay. And then in my other bracket, between I had Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner against Shogun and Dan Henderson. I went with Shogun and Dan Henderson to go to the final.
Okay. And I had Joanna Jędrzejczyk against Zhang Wei Li going up against what do I just pick?
I think.
Shogun and Henderson. That's a toughie.
Can't go wrong with both those.
You know what? I'm going with the girls. I'm going with I'm going to Joanna and Zhang Wei Li. It was just
right.
I know it's pretty recent. I hate the idea of going recent, but that was just such a great fight.
Fine. So with the final, Dominic Cruz and TJ Dillashaw against Shogun and Dan Henderson. My winner was Shogun and Dan Henderson. That right now is probably one of my favorite fights to watch to this day.
All right. Yeah, no, you can't argue with that. And I had between Lawler McDonald and Ioana and Zhang Wei Li. I can't get away from Lawler McDonald. I have that as my winner. It was just one of those. I think it's the stare. I think it's that stare that they give to each other at the end of the fourth. That more than anything, I remember about that. Just because those guys were just going. But you have similarities in our winners though between that fight and Shogun and Henderson. You have these fighters who are just giving it all they got, and they're bloody and exhausted. I think that's what makes one of the greatest fights. I mean, they're definitely both the winners in the same category.
And I think Wei Li and Joanna are definitely going to go down to the Hall of Fame eventually as one of the greatest female fights and also one of the greatest all-time fights out there. They basically set the standard, I think, new standard for female fights.
Yeah, no doubt. And on a different day, to be honest, I could have them as my winner. It's I think they're pretty interchangeable, to be honest.
I think maybe within a few years, I think I'll be able to pick them, depending on what scenario it will be
exactly. Might be able to appreciate it more.
Yeah.
As time goes on, that seems to happen. So.
Because it used to be Griffin and Bonner for a long time, and
for a while, yeah.
Yeah, and now it just slowly passed. I think MMA Mania even had Robbie Lawler and McDonald win.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, Bonner, Griffin. It set a standard for a while, I'd say, and then you had so much good talent coming in after that. It just made for a lot better fights. Some of that got up to that level. All right, so that's it. That's our bracket. Thanks everybody for keeping up with it if you have. So hopefully in the next coming week or so, we have a potential fight card to talk about and maybe even make a prediction for something that can happen officially. May 9th is, the next card that they're looking to make. It seems supposedly, they seem pretty sure about it, but you got to take it with a grain of salt at this point with everything going on. And it's I mean, I hope it happens. Obviously, everyone's safety is first, unfortunately, but it's I just hope at that point things are on the way getting just a little better and enough that something like that could happen to at least entertain. So yeah, hopefully in the coming week or so we'll be talking about that. So all right, so thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you guys next time. Stay safe.